Hey, what's going on, everybody? Good morning. And it's your boy 3 Stacks in this thing, representing Team King of Games. And today I would like to go over a quick meta-analysis. I'm not going to touch every single topic and every bit of crucial information that I possibly can, because I'm a little bit limited to the time that I have. But the main thing that I wanted to share with you guys is how to combat Spyrals. Now, this deck seems to be hyping like crazy. I actually just literally did some research right now before I made this video. And now a lot of people are hyping around this deck. You know, they're hopping on the dick. They're getting on the bandwagon. They're like, look, dude, I want to play this deck because I want to win. You do not necessarily have to play this deck to win, because skill level does dictate a lot of where the game goes. And basically, no matter how far you progress your game state, if you're not a good player, you're not going to do good. And bottom line, that's what it is. So don't think just because you're playing a good deck that you're going to win. But with that out the way, there's a lot of ways to combat Spyrals. A lot of people are scared, you know, and think that they can't handle it. And I would like to give a shout out to Simo, because Simo knows what he's talking about. You guys need to listen to this man, because he actually does know what he's talking about. Now, from what I've learned, I actually have had a year and a half of experience of playing against Spyrals, because my teammate Eric has played Spyrals since they released. I think it's the Dark Illusions, if I'm not mistaken, that came out with Super Agent, Drone, and Quick Fix. Those are the only 3 Spiral cards that first came out. And he played it just like that. And then slowly more support came out. The dude has mastered the deck. So I have learned all of its weaknesses. Now, one of the biggest weaknesses to this deck, and its hugest flaw that people fail to notice, is that no matter how powerful the board that it makes, as long as there's a sleeper there, the sleeper is its weakness. The sleeper is the card you want to go for. Similar to a pendulum matchup, you want to take out their time pendulum graph, whether it's with the Cosmic Cyclone, the Twisters, an Ogre, or if you can just bait it out. Either way, the sleeper is the card you want to go for. The sleeper is what's going to blow their board away. That's the board wipe right there. When they make that unbreakable board, quote unquote, with the firewall dragons, the helix, the sleeper, the utility wire set with the hand traps in hand, whatever disruption they have, the sleeper is the board wipe they gave you for free. They gave you a free Dark Hole Raigeki. People fail to realize and to pay attention to this key, crucial point. That is the biggest weakness of the Spiral archetype. No matter how powerful the board they make, as long as they make a sleeper, they have given you access to break their board. They've given you the potential to do so. Now, of course, there's basically a line in order on how you go about that, because if you're playing a deck such as Draco's, your Masterpiece will not be able to be touched. So you can use your Masterpiece to deal with the sleeper directly and take him head on. If you're not dealing with that, your deck's going to have to resort to some other forms of disruption. The first card you want to go for is Spiral Resort. Now, if their Resort is on the field, it's going to be one extra card in your way. If you're main decking a card like Ghost Ogre, your Ghost Ogre can actually get rid of the Resort. The end result is the sleeper still can't be targeted and it can't be destroyed, but all you have to do is take out the last Resort and kill the sleeper. If you have to board wipe them and leave nothing but the sleeper and deal with the sleeper head on, you can do so. But the main point that I want to share with you guys is sleeper is the hugest weakness to the Spyrals board, because if sleeper dies, everything goes with him. And although he's protected by the one last resort, all you have to do is deal with that last resort. ABCs are able to do so. If an ABC player happens to be able to board wipe the Spiral player going second, right, and happens to main deck a Dark Hole Raigeki and is able to board wipe them and leave them with the sleeper that can't be destroyed, if they can make a buster, they can take that man head on. As obviously they can just banish the last resort. If the sleeper is able to resolve, you can bait out, the sleeper can be baited out by the buster and they can still make rank 4s. But in addition to that, outside of the ABC archetype, every deck that has a form of disruption in their main deck will be able to deal with the sleeper. More specifically, I did actually want to talk about Masterpiece, because Draco variants are going to have a huge combating edge, a huge advantageous edge over the Spiral players. This is our beneficial accoutrement, the Masterpiece. If you're able to make a Masterpiece, the first card you're going for is Last Resort. Once you pop Last Resort, Masterpiece can then destroy sleeper. The entire board goes with him. Nothing can be done to stop that. It's a mandatory effect. Sleeper has to destroy all their cards. So the firewalls are gone. The helix is gone. Utility wire is lackluster because there was nothing for them to hit in the first place, and now it's gone. There's no more agent. That's one way. Now, if you're going to second against the Spyrals and you're trying to deal with that unbreakable board, there are quite a few cards that are generic that every deck has access to, so long as they can afford them and so long as they can main deck them or side them. Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring being the best hand trap of the format. This card, depending on when you use it, will get you game against the Spiral player or just finish their turn off for you. Now, something that I want you to pay attention to is that there are a lot of ashable cards in the Spiral archetype. Even if you ash the machine dupe after their normal quick fix, they can still go off. Unfortunately, they can. All they need is an extender like Super Agent. And if they happen to guess it right, guess what? They still have a combo. So the main goal is you can let your opponent build that board. And what you want to do is wait for them to drop the Helix. That's the card you want to ash. If you ash the Helix, you force them to put their combo to a halt. And they use their extenders to get to the Helix. If you were already able to disrupt them with, for example, a Ghost Ogre, they're forced to use their extender to get to the Helix. So once you ash the Helix, inevitably there's no other extenders they can use to finish their combo off. Even if they can special summon quick fixes, the most they could do is special quick fixes and search their gear cards and perhaps link summon using the the Super Agent and make some other link play. But bottom line is the ash is what's going to be the most detrimental card going against that deck. This card is what's going to stop that archetype. Ogre is a card that I see that Spiral players aren't actually maining, and I'm not understanding. Ogre is enabling you to combat Spirals even further. Ogre outs the Spiral Resort. The problem with having Ash Blossom is although you can ash the Spiral Resort, it stays on the field, and what happens now is they have a sleeper that can't be targeted, and they have a last resort that prevents the sleeper from being targeted again or destroyed, and now you have to pick off the Spiral Resort and then go for the last resort and then go for the sleeper. And if you don't have the resources to do so, you're going to lose that game because the board they make, all they need to do is attack for game next turn. So when Spirals go first and get their combo, if you can't stop them, you have one turn to play Yu-Gi-Oh and you're done after that because they're going to kill you. So Ogre and Ash are two of the most detrimental hand traps going against that archetype. They're going to shut down a lot of plays. Ogre forces Helix to search instead of special, which is important because the monster he summons obviously is going to be linked to him. Ogre can hit the resort. Now, there might actually be times if your opponent is going second using Super Agent where you would want to Ogre their agent because now they're trying to use the agent's effect to pop a back row and then go into their Helix feeling safe that the solemn strike has been baited out. But Ogre will kill the agent nonetheless, which that's totally fine because they don't have two Spiral monsters anymore. And if they have a big red, they have the big red. That's just something you have to keep in mind. But aside from Ash and Ogre, which are probably the best hand traps that are main deck worthy without bricking on you, Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries is another way to combat this archetype. Now this deck has two really powerful targets that you want to hit, which is either Firewall Dragon or Spiral Double Helix. Now, for the most part, if you open up with an Ash or an Ogre in tandem with Winter Cherries, I highly suggest that you use that Cherries and go for the Firewall. Go for the Firewall because you're going to deal with Double Helix's effect via Ogre or Ash. What happens then is even if they have extenders, once you stop the Helix play, their extenders will get them nowhere. Their long-term goal, they will make a very subpar and mediocre board because Firewalls will not be able to come out. And at that point, if they're able to, they can make the sleeper. But it might be a bit too hard because they weren't able to get Master Plan on field and link with her and use her to search the Spiral Resort and the sleeper. And the Spiral Resort in turn will search the last resort. So basically, they would have to open up and search for Spiral Sleeper early, which most Spiral players actually don't do. They use him to finish their combo. So Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries is a very powerful card when combating that deck. Keep in mind that these are basically the only two cards that you really want to hit. The deck does have access to Baguska, the Terribly Tired Tapir, but, excuse me, unfortunately, that card is not mandatory to the playstyle. It just happens to be icing on the cake. What you want to go for are their two most powerful extra deck monsters, which is Firewall and Double Helix itself. Now, if you do not open with an Asher and Ogre, you're going to want to use the Winter Cherries on Double Helix. And nonetheless, if they're able to make Firewalls, they're able to make Firewalls. But stopping the Helix, more than likely 70% of the time will stop the sleeper from coming out. It'll stop the last resort, and it'll basically become a Firewall Dragon kind of play. And Firewall Dragon's great, but he happens to target. So if you being a Spiral player can put your last resort on the field, any Spiral monster you summon after that cannot be touched by Firewall. So just keep that in mind. So the Ash Sisters or the Ghost Sisters are the most powerful hand traps in terms of combating these Spirals. The next hand trap we're going to talk about obviously is Droll and Lockbird. Now, hand traps obviously are just going to be defining this format. If you're going second against Spyrals and you don't have a hand trap, you're at a huge disadvantage because now you're forced to deal with that board that at its full potential head on. If the Spiral player does not mess up in his combos, he's going to make one of the most powerful boards possible. So these cards are what you want to see in your opening hand in your first 5 if you're going or your first 6 if you're going second. Well, you still draw 5 and you'll draw 6 per turn, but nonetheless, you need to see one of these hand traps. Droll and Lockbird is kind of powerful against Spyrals. While it does stop their searches, it does basically steal a turn from them. The problem is it doesn't deal with any of the threats. It basically halts them for 1 turn. It's similar to Dimensional Barrier against Zodiacs. When you debarrier Zodiacs, they're done for 1 turn, but next turn, they still have the potential to come back on you. So Droll is a bit meh because sometimes if you don't have the resources to deal with them or at least put out your own threat to be in their way, for example, a Masterpiece, which they'll have to combat that in addition to make their board, your Droll and Lockbird will basically just stall for time, which might not be optimal, but this hand trap is a bit more flexible and versatile in the terms that it shuts down Magicians, it shuts down Draco variants, it shuts down ABCs. It even can shut down Paleos because they do a tad bit of drawing with Pot of Desires and Card of the Demise and, you know, Paleozoic Opabenia and stuff like that. So Droll can be a bit more powerful. And he does stop you from adding to hand periods, which can shut down Oath Dragon. He just says that neither player... no, I'm sorry. He just adds from deck to hand. So I apologize for that. It's just he stops you from adding cards from deck to hand. So Droll, while he is powerful and while he is hyping, Droll doesn't actually deal with any of the threats. He actually just puts a halt to the combo. And if you've opened with the nuts, you know, you have the tits in your hand, you have an overpowered hand, Droll is all you needed. Just to make their field as mediocre as possible so that all you would have to worry about is their hand traps if they have them. And the next and final hand trap that we're going to talk about is actually Max C. Max C is a very, very powerful hand trap this format. The unfortunate thing is if you go first and you draw into your Max C, you better pray that they don't kill you even if you put them under the Max C, because Spiral players are actually able to push through the Max C and kill you in 1 turn. So at that point, it doesn't matter if you drew your entire deck. The problem is they are still able to kill you. But if you're main decking cards like Ogre and Ash, you inevitably will draw them going against a Spiral player because they're going to give you so much advantage if they choose to push under the Max C, which most Spiral players actually will because there's a sense of confidence that comes with that deck being able to do so much and make unbreakable boards. Most players would feel confident giving you a bajillion cards. If their board's unbreakable, it's unbreakable. If you're main decking board wipes and hand traps and you put a Spiral player under Max C, you'll be able to cut them off in the middle of their turn and basically clean the clocks on them once you start off in your opening play if you're main decking these cards because you will draw them. So the hand traps, the 5 best hand traps of the format, are a great way to combat the Spiral archetype. They're also a great way to combat the Paleozoic players. Not necessarily the Paleozoic players. I actually meant to say Pendulum Magician players. Reaper and Winter Cherries is not very good. I mean, you can play Time Star and take one of their best rank 4s, but they can still make BLs and Omega and other synchro plays, and they still have generic rank 4s at their access, like Tornado Dragon. So the main cards you actually want to use on them are these 3 right here. Ash, if you're gonna Ash anything, you might want to Ash the Pendulum Call or the Duelist Alliance initially. Sometimes Ashing Double Iris isn't smart because they might open up with the graph anyway, and also there's a chance that they can pop another Double Iris because he's not once per turn. So it's you have to be very careful with this card because basically a Pendulum Magician player can easily bait this out and you can waste it on the wrong card. Ogre is actually more detrimental against that deck because if they open with the Time Pendulum graph and activate its effect to destroy one of their scales and one of your cards or one of their Pendulum monsters and one of your cards, you chain Ogre to that and that trap is destroyed and its effect cannot resolve. Droll and Lockbird is actually a lot more powerful against the Magicians simply because their entire deck searches. And Droll and Lockbirding them means that they're just basically going to have a high scale and a low scale in their opening hand. And they just pendulum summon what they have. And what happens is since they couldn't search Harmonizing Magician, they couldn't search Double Iris. Although the cards are at 3, they would have to open up with them, which is fine. They can open up with those. They can pendulum summon. They can't make Time Star because they can't search. So the most they probably could do is if they make Time Star, they could probably add from grave to hand whatever they detach. Or they could just make a Tornado Dragon and just kind of pass turn. So Ogre and Droll and Lockbird are a lot more powerful against that deck than Ash Blossom is typically in my personal experience playing against the deck. And Maxi doesn't do very much against Magicians. Now the reason why I'm talking so much about Spyrals and Magicians is because they happen to be the 2 best decks. Third would probably be any Draco variant. But we're mainly just talking about the hand traps because this is how you're going to be able to combat Spyrals if you're forced to go second and you lose the dice roll. Now, with that portion and segment out of the way, the next card I'm going to talk about before we get to the second part is Solemn Strike. Solemn Strike is a card that's kind of being underestimated. Solemn Strike is very powerful against the Pendulum Magician archetype. Even if they summon Black Fang, they get one monster out versus the 3 or 4 that they're planning on Pendulum summoning, which inevitably not only deals with their threats, but minimizes the play that they can make. Although Black Fang can summon something from grave, what are they going to do with that one monster, if you're understanding what I'm saying? Strike is also very powerful because you can strike the effect of Helix and not the summon of Helix. If you strike the summon of Helix, they can still make another one, but if you strike the effect of Helix, he's a hard one to return. They're done at that point, and they no longer control an agent, so their utility wire is actually null void. And although one can say that Spiral Super Agent can bait out the strike, you can only use him once per turn, and he has to hit the right back roll, and you're calling it at random, so you might not hit the strike, and if they don't hit your strike, you're going to stop them that turn. Striking Sleeper, which a lot of people have really thought that you could strike Sleeper summon and he would blow the field up. Striking Sleeper does nothing because he's not on the field, and his effect clearly says if this card on the field is destroyed, you kill all of your cards and summon an agent. So if you strike the summon of Sleeper, unfortunately you're not doing much, but you are dealing with one threat of the numerous that they're going to make, but you still might not win. So I did want to add Strike because these are basically traps. These are hand traps and this is a trap. Now the next segment of the deck is going to be if you're still going second against Spyrals and you did not open with hand traps, these are great cards to either side deck or main deck. These are the cards that are initially going to deal with the threats that Spiral players are going to put out. Dark Hole and Raigeki clear everything but Sleeper. And at that point, if you're playing an invoked variant, you can simply make your Makaba, declare an attack on Sleeper, damage step, drop your Alistair if Sleeper decides to do something before damage step, before you activate Alistair and damage step, because Sleeper can't pop anything in damage step. If they choose to try to pop Makaba, he'll simply negate him and banish him. And there's nothing that they can do about that because he may not be able to be targeted or destroyed, but nobody said he can't be banished. So invoke variants do happen to have a bit of an edge over that Sleeper. So if you have a board wipe and a way to make a Makaba, if you're playing invoke, you have an edge. If you have a board wipe and a way to make Masterpiece, you have an edge. If you have a board wipe and a beater that can just attack over the Sleeper, you don't have an edge. You're basically, if you're going second against that board, the Dark Hole Raigeki will clear everything except Sleeper, and at that point, you're taking him head on. Now, because he can't be targeted or destroyed, he's still very, very powerful, and he can destroy 2 of your cards at no cost whatsoever. So a board wipe will deal with a lot of threats, but nonetheless, if you don't have a way to out the Sleeper, they may potentially come back on you, because Spirals tend to need just one turn to go off. So that's just something to keep in mind. But the Dark Hole and Raigeki are very important because if you have a way to out the Sleeper, for example, if you have a Kaiju in a board wipe, you can Kaiju the Sleeper and board wipe, and they lose absolutely everything that they have just made. While they did get in, the millionth amount of cards that they could from their deck to their hand, so long as their board is clear, you're free to swing for as much damage as you possibly can, create your board, and have them deal with it in addition to reestablishing themselves. Now the next cards, which I consider to be board wipes, are a lot more powerful combating the Spiral players because these board wipes not only do not target, but they do not destroy either, which means that Sleeper, it doesn't matter what happens. He's going to go. So Raw Spear Mode is actually one of my favorite side deck staples. I've been side decking this for over a year now. A lot of people have given me a bad rep for side decking this, saying it's not good. There's just nothing much you can do. They would have to overextend to play this card. I have always side decked this. Everyone who's subscribed to my channel knows I have always side decked Raw Spear Modes because I want to be ready for anything. And at the offset chance that I'm playing some crazy deck that summons a lot of monsters like Spyrals, even before Spyrals came out, I want to have my Raw Spear Mode ready. Now the problem with, we're talking about Raw Spear Mode first before we get to evenly matched, because this card's a bit more accessible than this is, just because this is a bit more budget for you budget players. It's only $23 if I'm not mistaken. Now Raw Spear Mode, when you're going second against a Spiral player and you happen to draw one of your 3 Raw Spear Modes, if you're siding 3, which will happen often if you side 3, you will draw one. It's similar to drawing one of your 3 Terraformings or one of your 3 Super Agents or one of your 3 Quick Fixes. Now, the Raw Spear Mode is going to deal with A, B, and C. The Firewall Dragons being A and B, and C being the Sleeper. At that point, all they have left is the Helix and the Utility Wire that is easily baitable. Easily baitable. And in addition to that, because you are clearing those threats without targeting or destroying them, obviously Sleeper goes. His effect doesn't go off to blow up the field, which that's not actually bad because you want your raw spear mode back. Because in addition to that, as I was saying, once raw spear mode returns to your control where he belongs, this monster cannot be targeted for effects or attacks. Now, that's very important to keep in mind because the Spiral archetype happens to have every form of removal that targets. Nothing in that main deck, except for if they're playing Dark Hole or Raigeki, is going to get over your raw spear mode. Sleeper cannot target and destroy him. Your utility wire cannot put him on top of the deck. Firewall Dragon cannot bounce him back to back to your hand. Unfortunately, your super agent, no matter how much attack you give him with drone, cannot target him for an attack. Your Utopia the Lightning cannot target him. You have to have a board wipe or a kaiju to deal with the raw spear mode if you're playing Spyrals. Because now, evenly matched is null void against this monster, because obviously if you evenly match them, the smart player will keep this card and banish all their other cards face down. So the argument that evenly matched counters raw spear mode is null void. Raw spear mode is one of the best side deck staples, if not the best, playing against Spyrals, because you not only deal with their threats, but you give yourself a practically invincible monster just due to the simple fact that Spyral's only method of removal happens to target. And because this card clearly states in the spec, this card cannot be targeted for attacks or by card effects, the Spiral players cannot deal with this. So if you want to build up your resources, you can sit on this card as long as you want. The Spiral player's best option at that point would be to recycle Last Resort, equip it to a monster, and attack directly. And even though they're able to do that, the problem is you're gaining so much resources that you can kill them whenever you see fit, whenever you want. Because as long as that raw spear mode's there, the only way they're going to get you is with Last Resort. And another thing that I want to keep in mind is that most Spiral players are actually only playing one Last Resort. So that's just something to keep in mind. Once you out the first Last Resort, more than likely, just because most standard lists plays one, you don't have to worry about it anymore. So raw spear mode, aside from Dark Hole and Raigeki, is definitely the best card to draw going second against them. If you happen to draw one of these 5 hand drops that I showed you, in addition to raw spear mode, you're inevitably going to take control of that game. A Spiral player may feel very, very confident opening up with the quick fix and a machine dupe and going off, but their confidence will die down once they see that spear mode because they cannot answer to its summon. They can't do anything in response to spear mode. Just like when you drop a kaiju, you just can't do anything. It's gonna happen. The one card that could stop this card's summon or just clear it would be a Torrential Tribute. And more than likely, most players are not going to be main decking that card because for some reason, Torrential's bad, which is a great card. So raw spear mode, in my opinion, is actually the best card to combat that deck when you're going second. If you go first against Spyrals, you're at a huge advantage because if you have at least 2 forms of disruption, you can cut their combo into 1/3 of what it could have been. And at that point, they're just making mediocre boards and you can easily pick them apart. ABC Buster Dragon can do the trick. Totally Awesome can do the trick. A Time Pendulum Graph could more than likely do the trick. A Cypher Lord Omega can help you out. For example, Masterpiece or an Invoked Mechaba can definitely do the trick. So like any of those boss monsters that I just stated, including Time Pendulum Graph, in addition to just one hand trap like Ash or Ogre or even Winter Cherries, will kill a Spiral player if you get to go first against them. So the reason why I'm showcasing all these good cards that are great for going second aside from Solemn Strike is because Spiral players are at their hugest advantage when they get to go first. So the problem now is everybody who's not playing Spyrals, who's going second against Spyrals, has to have these cards to combat them because unfortunately the truth is the board is practically unbreakable. So if you don't main deck or side deck any of these cards, you will not be able to break that board unless you can summon perhaps a Masterpiece under all that pressure. And Masterpiece can definitely pick the board apart because every card that they have, Masterpiece is immune to it. So it's not like they can do anything about it. Masterpiece is just going to slowly pick it apart. But the thing is, even though he's able to do that, he can only do so much in one turn. You can out one monster by tributing him and the trap and the monster, and you can out another monster with him and attack the third. But nonetheless, they're going to keep something. Even so, Masterpiece isn't going to break the board, but he can literally deal with 3 of their threats. Masterpiece can target Firewall and pop him, and then he can target Firewall with his actual effect. So the trap retrieval Masterpiece will target the monster and pop him. His effect will pop another one, and then you can just attack the sleeper. If there was a last resort on sleeper, Masterpiece will pop the last resort and then just attack over the sleeper instead of worrying about anything that would go with the sleeper anyways. So the main thing that I want you guys to get out of this, if you don't have any of these cards, including Evenly Matched, basically go for the sleeper. That's the hugest disadvantage that the Spiral player has. That's their actual, you can say that's their Achilles heel. While it does give them a huge advantage over you, it's the biggest weakness that they can ever put on their board. Most Spiral players do not pay attention to that. They don't think that you're going to go after the sleeper because it can't be destroyed. You're scared of the sleeper. You don't want to touch the sleeper. Most people would think, oh, he's going to go for the firewalls because that's the next threat that they can actually deal with. A smart player, and I'm sharing this information because I want all my fellow Yu-Gi-Ohs, my fellow Yu-Gi-Oh duelists to be able to do good this format. A smart player will go for the Spiral sleeper. If they play the sleeper, they just gave you an edge over them. Because as long as you have a way to deal with the sleeper, anything else on their board doesn't matter because it's going with him. And now finally, before we get into some extra deck stuff, we're talking about evenly matched because this trap is definitely one of the most powerful traps of the format, if not the most powerful trap. And in technical terms, it falls in the category with the 5 hand traps that I explained. Because you can play it from your hand and it happens to be a trap. So, get my drift. It's a little bad joke. Evenly matched happens to be a hand trap, which is pretty versatile, but it does have its flaws. Now, the trap's amazing. It can do so much. It clears boards without targeting or destroying. So monsters that are, invincible and immune, it doesn't matter if those monsters are unaffected by traps because your opponent is the one who's banishing it. So the fact that this trap affects the player and not the monster is what makes it so broken. But the thing is, your opponent, no matter what, if you play this card from hand, will get to keep their most important monster. Any Spiral player in his right mind will just keep the sleeper. But there is something. There is just a little bit of a flaw to that play. Because when evenly matched resolves, if they let it resolve, if they don't have a response, which I guess set rotation would be the one response that they could possibly main deck. If they don't have a response, the problem now is Last Resort gets banished, everything gets banished but Sleeper, and if you can kill Sleeper, they're done. And also in addition to that, Sleeper, his only target is himself, which is pretty darn broken because he can try to activate his effect. You can bait it out with anything in the form of a diagram, anything like an invoked monster. You can bait it out with your Union Hanger, you can bait it out with your Swap Frog or your Totally Awesome. You can bait it out with your, your Time Pendulum Graph if you have it, and if not, you can just deal with him head on, making a rank 4 such as Utopia the Lightning after you've baited his effect out. So there is still a flaw to that. Even if evenly matched resolves and they keep the sleeper is not protected, so he's basically vulnerable, which is very important. So evenly matched, similar to Raw Spear mode, will deal with everything that they have. And now that you've gotten rid of the Last Resort, if your deck has something that can destroy sleeper, just destroy him. Play the Dark Hole, play the Raigeki. Or, if you happen to play something like a Masterpiece in your deck, make your Masterpiece. He can't do anything about it, and you're just going to walk all over them at that point. So evenly matched is still a card that you have to keep in mind that these are the cards that are going to combat the Spiral players if you're forced to go second. So if you have any of these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cards, Raw Spear mode is at 3, evenly matched is at 3. Every hand trap except Maxi is at 3. So that's 3, 6, 9, 12. 15, 18, 20, 21 possible ways of dealing with Spirals if you're forced to go second, if you main deck or side deck these cards. I've explained thoroughly how each card can combat them and how they're crucial to have in your opening hand. If you don't have any of these, you just have to deal with them head on, and it's just not likely that you're going to win that. And next, I want to talk about Calamities. Calamities is a card that for some reason it dodged the ban list. I don't understand why the card is very, very broken. Now, Calamities is a very underrated card, and I know that most decks aren't able to make it now, but if you're still playing Dinos, and if you're still playing a True King variant, if you're able to make Calamities, regardless of what Spirals do, even if they're able to out the Calamities will turn their monster effects off completely. Quick Fix cannot activate from grave, Helix cannot go off, Sleeper cannot destroy anything if he is dropped on the field after the Calamities resolve. If you're able to make this card in your opening hand and you go first and you make this, you put them to a complete halt. All of their combos revolve around monster effects. So at that point, guess what Spirals can do? Absolutely nothing. They can't do anything. And in order to get their sleeper on the field, they have to dump 3 Spiral cards into their graveyard. In order to do that, they have to use Quick Fixes. They have to use Drone. They have to do combos with their monsters. So Calamities, you guys are really sleeping on this card. If you're able to have access to this card and you can make him in your first turn, Spirals are done for that turn. They can't even search their utility wire to out this. They can't search their sleeper to out this. They can't search anything. Their searchers are monsters. Sure, they can activate Spiral Resort. They can activate Resort, and at bare minimum, they can search like for example, a drone, or a last resort, for example. If they open up with an agent, they can like normal the agent, equip resort to it, just to stall out. But, and I'm not lying to you, if you have a calamities, they can do nothing to you. They can't do anything. They can't even make the threats that would out him. They can't make the sleeper because they're not able to use monsters to dump the spiral names in their grave that they need. They can't search utility wire, which they play one of, so they're not going to open up with it. They can't use quick fix. They can't use drone. They can't call the cards in your deck, so they don't know the information that they need. They don't have super agent, can't even resolve. When you're playing against that deck, just call Earth. Just call Earth. It doesn't matter. Quick fix can't resolve Engrave, super agent can't resolve, Helix can't resolve, they can't even summon sleeper. Calamities is one of the most powerful cards combating spirals. There's nothing they can do to it. They have to have a board wipe or a kaiju. So this card, one could say it stalls, but it does a lot more than stall. It puts them to a complete halt, and they can't, it's not like Droll and Lockbird where they're like, you know, they could still make somewhat of a board. It's not like when you hit them with an Asher and Ogre and they're still able to make somewhat of a board. It's like they can't make a board at all. They can't. If you've seen Spirals go off, their combos revolve around monsters, and Calamity says, no, you can't. Not at all. The next card that I would like to talk about, obviously, is just Baguska. I would show you, but everybody knows Baguska. If you're able to make a Baguska going against Spirals, yeah, you can kind of put them to a halt, but the thing is, Baguska, you're still able to deal with the Baguska a little bit more easier than you are able to deal with the Calamities. Now, the only reason why I do say that is because they can basically like, Baguska and Calamities are very, very similar. Baguska is in defense. So while he's in defense, all of his effects apply that stall them out. There are a lot of smart players who are actually going to be main deck teching stuff like enemy controller, which can literally change the battle position of a monster. If I'm not mistaken, it just changes the battle position. And they're also going to use the enemy controller to just take the Baguska from you. And then there's the stuff like the kaiju can still happen, the board wipe can still happen. I just think in my personal opinion that Baguska is not as versatile as Calamities is, because Baguska, in addition to that, doesn't stop graveyard effects. That's something that you have to keep in mind, because Drone and Quick Fix can activate from graveyard. And guess what? Even though Quick Fix might not get his effect when he's summoned and put to defense, they still get a Quick Fix on the field, meaning they can still link summon, they can still XYZ. Calamity says, no, you can't, all monsters in your possession can't do anything. So that's why I feel that even though Baguska is very similar to Calamities, and he is just as hard to out, the fact that Calamity stops monsters in your possession is what makes him so powerful. So that was just something that I wanted to just throw out there. I know that a lot of people aren't going to actually be playing Calamities. I myself actually happen to be fortunate enough to be able to make this card. And of course, in my opinion, basically, these are the best monsters of the format. Buster Dragon is great. You know, we have access to Buster and totally awesome, but these are the greatest monsters of the format, in my opinion, simply because Spirals can't do anything to this. They can't. Like, some people could say a drone can give Spiral Agent the attack he needs to attack over Masterpiece. You have to out the diagram first, and then you have to remember that Masterpiece can still just pop Super Agent, no matter how much attack you're given with Drone. And then under the Calamities, they just can't do anything. So these two cards are what, like, if your deck can make these cards when you're playing against Spirals, they can't do anything about that. They really can't. And sometimes it's a little bit smarter to make a spell monster Masterpiece, because when you tribute the spell, it'll pop the Spiral Resort. And then Masterpiece can then target whatever he wants, which is pretty insane. And one more thing that I want to share before I end this video, because we are heading towards the end, is if you do play Dracos, this format, you have a huge competitive edge